Ready? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mandy Sanghera, and it's a great honor and a great privilege to be moderating this panel for the World Humanitarian Forum digital series. It's a great honor to be talking about something that I'm really passionate about, women empowerment, and looking at some real solutions today. So I'm really excited. Just before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the World Humanitarian Forum. It is the largest and most inclusive non-partisan forum in the humanitarian aid and international development. The World Humanitarian Forum brings together some decision makers, opinion formers, the public and private and the non-profit sector, as well as the next generation of partnership builders, something that I'm really passionate about. And we also have one of our youth here that actually is a part of our working group. And also, as last year we had our event with New York that was actually really had a really good global discussion around the SDGs and around the impact and looking at the global reset. And it's about collaborating and our shared values and our objectives. And I think this is more important than ever before, especially in times of crisis. And the fact that we are all in this together, and the World Humanitarian Forum is delighted to outline the objectives of this year's largely considered conference that's coming up. And again, please join us in May, because actually we are going to be holding another conference with amazing keynotes and great speakers again, and looking at building back better and looking at through the lens and looking internationally, how can we bring people together? How do we engage with people, engage with leaders, and look at real change, lasting change? So that'll be great. And today, the conference that I'm going to be chairing is around looking at the economic empowerment of women and girls. We will be looking at, how can men and boys be included in the program to build back and look at addressing gender discrimination. We have seen during the pandemic that women have been really affected quite a lot by this pandemic. And, they've taken on multiple responsibilities, caring roles, and, and sort of juggling teaching their children and a lot of other things that are going to be discussed here today. And we're also going to be looking at some of the gender inequalities that are facing women. And we've also seen that inequalities like never before have come to the surface. So I'm really looking forward to this debate, and and it's going to be a really interesting, thought-fulfilling conversation. And I'm now going to come over to Stephanie. Actually, if you can tell us who you are, what you do, and where you're from, please.
Thank you so much, Mandy, and thank you to the World Humanitarian Forum for having me today. I'm so delighted and thrilled to be a part of this powerhouse panel. My name is Stephanie Ullah. I am the Director for Generation Equality Engagement at the United Nations Foundation. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, the UN Foundation helps the UN to mobilize ideas, people, and resources for collective action. And at UNF, my portfolio is mainly centered on global gender policy advocacy, as well as mobilizing networks of women leaders and male allies around generation equality, which is the UN Women convened set of forums meant to commemorate the now 26th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action and to create a new action agenda for gender equality. And I'd just really like to underscore the once in a decade opportunity to accelerate action on gender equality that generation equality offers us. So it is convened by UN Women, it is co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France, and it's a critical moment for us to rebuild back better in the wake of COVID-19 and to turn rhetoric on the rights of women and girls into reality. We are building a powerful and diverse intersectional and intergenerational coalition for gender equality through 6 action coalitions, ranging from gender-based violence to economic justice and rights, and many more. My fellow panelist, Kekesha's organization, the Green Hope Foundation, is an action coalition leader on feminist action for climate justice, and I'm really hoping that she'll share more of her experience with you today on that. For many of us working on generation equality, this is really the moment for a revitalized global feminist movement, and we hope you'll join us. So I'm thrilled to be participating in this discussion today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and great work that you're doing as well. So thank you. Larry, I'm going to come over to you. If you can tell us about who you are, about your organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mandy, and thank you, Stephanie, and great to be with you, Kekesha. I'm Laurie Adams. I'm the CEO of Women for Women International. So Women for Women International works with women survivors of war to rebuild their lives, providing resources, skills, and knowledge. Our mission is to create a world in which all women can determine the own course of our own lives and achieve our full potential. We also have a men's engagement program in which we enroll local leaders and the spouses of women in our program so that they appreciate the value of power of women for all of us. So in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, in DRC, Iraq, Kosovo, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Sudan, a woman who enrolls in our program breaks the isolation of war and conflict by joining together with other women in a small, safe group where she can share. Together with her classmates, she learns a practical job skill, tailoring, poultry keeping, painting. She learns how to run this as a business, to save money, to set goals. She gains valuable health knowledge so she can provide the nutrition for herself and her family, and also learns about her reproductive health and rights. She learns about her right to vote, to inherit property, and to prevent gender-based violence and domestic abuse. In the context in which we work, where we seek out the most marginalized women, sometimes some of this really basic information has not been made available to her. So through this Stronger Women, Stronger Nations programs, probably most importantly, she connects with women like herself. They together form a support system. So it's power within and power with others. Women run their own businesses, they earn an income, they're healthier and stronger, they make their voices and opinion heard, they question these unspoken beliefs and norms, or these unquestioned beliefs and norms that hold women back. We know that from our own evidence that the women pass on their knowledge to their neighbors and their children, and this creates a ripple effect for generations. As you all know, by investing in women, we create a better world for all of us, a world that's more equal, more peaceful, more prosperous. And that's what we help achieve. And that is the power of women for women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're doing amazing work, and thank you for sharing that. It was really powerful. Thank you so much. I'm now going to come over to Kashan. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are and especially about your great organization. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mandy. And hello, everyone. I'm Kehkasha. Good morning from Toronto, Canada. I am a member of the World Humanitarian Forum's Youth Council. I'm also a United Nations Human Rights Champion, a Forbes 30 Under 30, and of course, founder president of Green Hope Foundation, which is a global social innovation enterprise that uses education for sustainable development as a transformative tool to engage and educate all sections of civil society with a specific focus on those who are marginalized, so refugees, orphans, the homeless, and empowering them, similar to you, Lori, to demand their rights for a more gender equal world. I founded Green Hope when I was 12 years old, 8 years ago, and I actually never imagined that we could evolve into a global change-making enterprise, making a difference across 25 countries. So we combine our grassroots level actions with advocacy at the highest levels of policy, because it's so critical to have young voices and especially young women in all aspects of decision making. And we use education for sustainable development because it enables us and our members to view one's challenges as one's own and shows them how to approach them at a grassroots level. So essentially, thinking globally and locally, and of course, acting locally. So creating new values and behaviors to contribute to the solutions and thereby creating a sustainable society. Since majority of the children and youth whom we work with have never been to school, and since our work is global, there are also additional dimensions and social strictures, especially for the women and girls. We use non-formal methods of communication like art, music, dance, and drama that enables the children to express their views. And our work so far has reached out to over 140,000 people globally, from the war zones on the Syria-Lebanon border to Kutupalong, the world's largest refugee camp that houses 1.5 million Rohingya refugees on the Bangladesh-Myanmar border, to the dense tropical forests of Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest. And during COVID, our work has actually gone online. And last 12 months, we've conducted over 75 webinars, bringing together heads of states, parliamentarians, UN officials, civil society leaders to really rebuild better. But at the same time, I'm happy to say that we've continued our work on the ground. And I'll talk about this later in the discussion, but we are working with COVID-affected communities in Bangladesh on circular economy solutions, with women-led circular economy solutions. And in rural Liberia, our project Powering Education has installed solar grids in homes, community centers, and schools that's providing the girls safe spaces to study. And our computer literacy education program is providing them with the skill sets that will take them away from the vicious cycle of drugs and crime. So basically, being more compassionate and empathetic, especially in these trying times, to address the most pressing challenges and rebuilding better into the new normal is our main motto right now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You're just doing some really, really amazing, phenomenal work, and really, really impressive. So thank you for that, for sharing that. I'm now going to come back to you, Larry, for a moment and actually sort of look at some of the work that you've been doing. And, you know, we've been talking about, you know, women's health, and we've seen a lot of things that have come to the surface. And actually, as we talk about the pandemic and trying to come through this globally together, there has been a couple of really shadow pandemics, one being around violence and one sort of around women's mental health and well-being. It would just be interesting to sort of hear from you, and with your organization, and especially you working in such rural parts of the world, around actually how can we make sure that no one's left behind, and how sort of, you know, what have been some of the successes and the challenges that you may have faced?
Thank you very much. No, it's been really horrific that the result of us all being enclosed for a period of time led to increased violence and risk for women and increased abuse. And of course, that's also because of the additional stress and the reduction in income, which are some of the drivers of what leads to violence. So I think it's important to remember, for those of us who are perhaps not in the US or Canada or Europe, that although that in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Nigeria, in Congo, in South Sudan, the places we work, although there were restrictions put in place and people had to stop moving in Iraq, for example, for 3 months, people are out there because you can't live. You know, you can't live unless you can go to market, unless you can grow food. And we have actually found ways at Women for Women to continue direct intervention and direct face-to-face training at a distance in smaller groups. But it felt absolutely life essential to us to continue to meet people directly, because although the pandemic is horrific, let's not forget that malaria, TB, malnutrition, hunger, these are ravaging the communities in which we work. And so you have to remain focused on the broader environment of economic and health and make sure women can still gain and savings. That said, during the time of lockdown, what I'm so proud of with our teams, I mean, in Iraq, people went to Viber and WhatsApp. Women shared phones because people knew that remaining a connection outside the home was absolutely essential during that period for, as you mentioned, mental health, but also for safety. In Rwanda, Women for Women works with, I think it's 11 different groups that work specifically, local groups that work specifically on men's engagement and violence against women. And we made sure that during the lockdown periods, people were still in touch with women, and women had a way to try to reach out and gain help and do referrals. Our training, we've had 3 random control trials, one in Afghanistan with the What's Work program in DFID, and 2 others in Nigeria and in Congo. And an interesting outcome that we didn't expect, we don't design for this, but we looked at it, is that the mental health, stress, and anxiety of women who go through our program lessens. What doesn't lessen is clinical depression, is depression. And so now we're looking at how do we better improve the mental health outcomes. The mental health outcomes are because women begin to not blame themselves, begin to feel more control of their lives, have more resources, support. So during the pandemic, which we're still undergoing, important to figure out how to stay connected. And we managed to do that even Iraq and Rwanda is where there was the most formal lockdowns, even when there was lockdowns, and throughout. That face-to-face connection and giving women access outside of the home and referrals onto professionals, psychosocial support, absolutely vital.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And one of the things that we have seen here that actually some of the work that I've done globally as well is we've seen digital poverty, women not having access, and actually young people not having access to the internet or data or having access to the internet. And some of the work that you're doing globally, have you faced challenges like that? I mean, obviously there is poverty, and obviously when food becomes an issue, it's really quite a serious matter, when people are trying to survive.
Was that back to me, Mandy?
Yeah, back to you. Yeah, sorry, Larry. Yeah, I was just asking you about some of the poverty and work in Africa.
Yeah, no, but this is one of the ways in which we've managed to accelerate to something more positive out of a crisis, right? Women for Women knows, because we work with women survivors of war, that, don't waste a crisis. War provides you an opportunity to, Rosie the Riveter is the story people know in the US. Like, women began to work outside of the home during the war, and then you maintain that shift in social norms. Rohingya women that we work with who had never had the opportunity to even come together, now they're coming together. So you keep the positive of the new ways of working during the crisis. So at Women for Women, before we work with ultra poor women, the majority of whom don't have access to phones, some of whom are even in areas where there's no cell phone coverage, so we're not digitizing, too difficult. We had to figure out how to digitize. We had to figure out how to reach women, and we had to do it, recognize, we felt terrible. We couldn't reach 100% of the women, but you know what? We could reach the majority. So we have managed to digitize much more. And we now are looking at, okay, we were doing, we do cash transfers every month, and we were forced to accelerate. How do you get that cash out to women by phones if they have them, or other means if they can't? And so when we build, I think one of you said it beautifully, we're building back better to a new norm. For us, that new norm includes two really important things. One, we have expanded our work on reducing the digital divide and accelerated our intention to work with tech partners to be able to make sure the resources, skills, and knowledge include digital ones. And then secondly, the ways of working in our own organization. It's been a great demonstrator of Iraq, Afghanistan, DRC, they all pivoted without any help from HQ, and they did it beautifully. And so when we now have leadership team meetings, there's no, the country director of Iraq is at the table in the same way, because we're no longer, there's no longer the people at headquarters are having the meeting after the other meeting. We're all at the table together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Steph, I'm going to come over to you. And obviously, the UN Foundation are doing phenomenal work globally around the world, especially around women empowerment and trying to give women, to earn and take control of their income and, kind of build their lives and build their communities. It would be really good to sort of hear from you a little bit about how can we further encourage the private sector, to get behind us and support the initiatives of the UN Foundation. How can we sort of make sure that no one is left behind, especially women, from this pandemic?
Absolutely. And I think to your first question on terms of how to ensure that there is private sector engagement and involvement, what I've been really pleased to see is that the private sector, in at least at the global level, and in certain sectors and industries, are actually already at the table. They've already committed to being action coalition leaders within generation equality. They are interested in understanding how they can use their power in terms of business, in terms of knowledge and expertise and advertising, and all of their massive reach towards the aim of encouraging gender equality and for the rights of women and girls. And I would also say that there are some private sector companies that it seems to me that their ready and willing to kind of step in and push on gender equality in ways that some governments aren't. So I think that they're already at the table in many ways. We can certainly always do better in terms of bringing more, it's a big tent. We should bring everyone in who needs to be a part of this movement. And we know that it does need to be multi-stakeholder for it to be successful. We knew that sort of in Beijing, the private sector, and by Beijing, I mean the last World Conference on Women, which has resulted in the last progressive intergovernmental agreement sort of that we've had in 1995, and that generation equality sort of really built this legacy off of. But in terms of the private sector wasn't sort of at Beijing, right? It was a very UN style process, government negotiations, civil society, fighting really hard for important language. And so with this sort of shift towards generation equality, we have been really, I think, excited and encouraged around the building of a new coalition of revitalized multilateralism, but also bringing in new actors who weren't there in 1995. And so I would say that with the private sector, it helps when we bring them in early, when we treat them as trusted experts in the movement. So not just, sources of cash or resources, but as true partners in every sense of the word and holding them accountable as well, as good partners do. When we can specifically leverage their sort of areas of expertise and reach, I think that there are so many new and emerging areas in which private sector companies need to be involved. I'm thinking particularly about the rise of gender-based violence online and on social media platforms, where we know we need more regulation, more enforcement, and more technological solutions, as well as normative and political ones to sort of shift that. I also think it helps the private sector when they're seeing that a lot of their peers are trying to race to the top for gender equality. No one wants to be left out or seen as sort of missing out of an opportunity. And I think that it helps when we, allow for the fact that feminism is a journey, and that for some companies there might be a learning curve, an opportunity to grow, but we should certainly bring them along. And I think that what is really exciting about the moments that we're looking at with generation equality, and by that I mean the Mexico City Forum next week, and then there's the Paris Forum at the end of June, which marks 2 moments. There's this real chance to sort of build this coalition, to get blueprints, to get essentially what amounts to a business plan for gender equality out there in the world, where every single one of us, from private sector to civil society, to governments, to researchers, all have a role to play in furthering it.
Brilliant. And I think, one of the things that we have seen before the pandemic, women were paid like 23.4% less than men, and now that's going to be even worse. We've seen that women of color are paid a lot less, and I think Latino women are paid even less in the dollar. And we've also seen that small businesses that are owned by women have been really affected, and there was a lot of women entrepreneurs, but we want to make sure that they are are still going to be able to be building back properly. I was just wondering, I know that you're doing great work, but have you got a good example of somewhere where, that through this pandemic, where somebody has been able to sort of make a change or use this for an opportunity? Because again, through struggles, through hardship, through pandemics, through crisis, there are always opportunities. There always are green shoots. I don't know if you have anything just to share if you want to. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandy. And I would say that, we have seen, and it's certainly all sort of emerging and still relatively new data, but we have seen that women entrepreneurs have been able to pivot in COVID-19. So they've certainly been disproportionately impacted. They've certainly, we've also seen a significant loss of income, but there have been instances in which we've seen examples where women are, moving to digital, where they're restructuring some of their, basic services, or even in some cases pivoting their businesses towards COVID recovery and relief. So I think that those are all bright spots within this, but I think that one of the opportunities that the crisis affords us that we can't lose out on is this chance to really rethink structural change, structural inequalities. And so I sometimes wonder if, we get focused on kind of I think positive stories are fantastic. They're important to share, but I don't want us to lose sight of everything that we need to do to fundamentally shift an economic system that wasn't working for women before the pandemic and isn't working for women now, and probably will not be unless we have significant interventions. And we know exactly, we know exactly, and we have known for many years what needs to change for women entrepreneurs to thrive, for there to be true economic empowerment for women and girls. It's around the care economy. It is around broader macroeconomic structural policy change, and ensuring better access to and control over resources, whether that's land or capital or skills training. All of those things I think about in terms of the need to create an enabling environment for women entrepreneurs, and the opportunity that we have to do so in the coming years.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Katja, and I was really excited about some of the things that you talked about when your introduction, and I would just like to sort of expand on that, because actually you talked about some of the Rohingya women and refugee women, and women who have been disproportionately affected by not just a pandemic, but actually have even pre the pandemic. And it would be lovely to hear some of your thoughts on that, because obviously we know that so many women are often the victims in conflict and war, and actually it would be great to hear some of your thoughts as well, and how can we support women to rebuild back better.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right, the pandemic is horrible for women, but when we're talking about safety issues, there are so many other safety issues that women continue to face, and the pandemic is just something that's been added on top of that. So the problems that we deal with in the communities we work with, child marriage, female genital mutilation, the things that we hear about so often, but we see that firsthand in the communities that we work in. And what we try to do is that we don't just classify the women as victims of circumstance. We try to give them that self-empowerment, basically, where they can become entrepreneurs in their own zones of influence and really lead that climate smart, women-led circular economy that will benefit their society and, of course, their children. And one of the main ways we do that is by addressing the sexual and reproductive health and rights. So just to elaborate on that, the first step that we saw was most effective for them is actually building toilets for them. So in some of the villages in Bangladesh, we actually have built toilets there, and we've also built deep bore tube wells and rainwater harvesting systems. And that actually ensures that not only does that improve their hygiene and sanitation, it also mitigates the dangers that these women and girls face when they used to previously go out in the fields at night to answer nature's call. They used to die from snake bites, and many of them, they were abused by marauders, trafficking, exploitation. And so, as I said earlier, education is the main pillar of our advocacy. And in these communities, we started by addressing the problems and the rights that they didn't even know about in terms of sexual and reproductive health, and let alone any freedom in those matters. So really going slowly, gradually getting them into that scenario where they understand they have those rights, then they understand that the children also have those rights. And we actually conduct these workshops for both men, women, and of course the children, so that the future generations and the present generations can grow up without the biases of the past. So we also provide the women with sanitary napkins. We provide them with organic soaps from local vendors, and through the rainwater harvesting systems and deep bore tube wells, we are also solving their water issues. And that's been a huge way that we've helped to improve their hygiene. And then, of course, at the same time, we've also worked on ensuring that we provide them with organic farming training. We provide them with organic seeds, and the women especially, we have turn them into poultry farmers. So by distributing hens, ducks, and roosters, we're able to ensure that the women keep 40% for themselves, and they're able to sell the other 60%, and they're able to have a sustainable livelihood. And this has been especially beneficial during the pandemic, because their husbands who used to work out of the village, they lost their jobs. So the women who generally used to work on the fields twice as hard as the men, but used to get paid less than half, they're now able to have a sustainable source of income. So that's just one of the examples that, and we've continued this throughout the pandemic. So that is just one of the examples of us helping the women to really realize that potential, the change-making potential that they all have.
Yeah, I really like that. And then, you know, one of the things that you just talked about there, how do you get the communities to really buy into your initiatives? Because you really are, you know, an inspiring young woman, and it would be just great to hear. So, you know, when you go to Bangladesh and other communities like that, I know we've got a prime minister in Bangladesh that isn't a woman, obviously, but actually, how do you engage with the communities to make sure that they get their girls to be educated and not be put into an early child forced marriage? Because we know that one thing that this pandemic has done, not just in Asia and the global south, but in Africa and other countries, that, you know, the numbers of early child forced marriage have gone through the roof, and, you know, nearly 85 million young women are going to be married off before their 18th birthday. It would just be interesting to hear your thoughts about how do you engage communities to empower and educate and sort of try and break that cycle, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. You know, some of our ambassadors, just citing Bangladesh again, they're 13-year-old girls who have 3-year-old children of their own. And it's horrifying, absolutely. But to answer your question, we work across 25 countries, like I said, and we always say that localization is key. And when we work on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals at the ground level, localizing is so important, because we never tell people what to do. We first identify the challenges that are over there. We work with the communities to figure out what are the most pressing challenges. We ask them, and then we are able to see how best we can help be that catalyst to address and solve the problems. And especially in conservative societies where it's not really okay to talk about these issues. As I mentioned before, we do so gradually. So by using creative modes of communication, like art, for instance, with the young girls stitching and painting on jute bags, so it's sustainable, environmentally conscious as well, we are able to ensure that slowly and steadily we are changing the mindsets. And it's not something that, you know, we don't expect to change everyone's mindsets all at once. We understand that it will take time. And I think it requires a lot of patience. And there are so many countries that we started working there 8 years ago. We've continued our work over there because it's a work in progress. And we achieve the milestones and we see what can we do better. And slowly and steadily, we are changing the mindsets. And again, that is through education. And the same 13-year-old ambassadors that I talked about, one of them actually said that, you know, now with my education, I never had the chance of going to school. And even my friends who did go to school, they stopped going there because of tremendous sexual harassment. But with my education, now I know that, you know, I'll make sure that my child never has to go through what I went through. And I think that is so powerful. And we just feel really happy that we are able to be that catalyst for change in communities such as those.
No, brilliant. I just think it's really fantastic. And I think it's, you know, really a very powerful message, because one thing that you're doing as a young woman yourself, but actually you're sending the elevator back down to other young women to become ambassadors. So I think that that is really something really fantastic. Larry, I'd like to come to you, because actually we're looking at this, but it would be interesting to see what is the role of men and boys in the conversation. How can we empower men to become a he for she? How can we empower him to be a part of the conversation? How do we change the mindsets and that he buys into women empowerment and women equality, and, you know, be looking at their sisters or their wives or their mothers' best interest?
Thank you, Mandy. So I'm going to start by answering it personally. I'm a mother of 2 sons, 24 and 25. And I want a world for them in which they can be their full selves. And as long as they are constrained by toxic masculinity, they can't do that. I've worked in so many cultures in which it's not even considered normal for a man to hold his own child. And, you know, that's a loss to men, for those of you who've had that, beauty of holding a child. And so men's engagement is important so that we lift all of us. At Women for Women, because we focus specifically on women and the outcomes for women, we track our men's engagement program for the outcomes on women. And we started the men's engagement program because the women in our program said, please help us. You've helped us understand these different ways of believing about women's power. But my husband wasn't raised to believe those things, and I need help convincing him. And so that's why we started it. And this came out of Nigeria and Afghanistan, and we've evolved it over many years. We were doing it before it became all the rage, in different forms. And where we've ended up is a combination of couples dialogues, trainings for men, and community meetings. We're actually in a research study with Hand in Hand and ICRW. ICRW did a whole mapping of all the men's engagement programs and then funded us and another partner to try to take best practices and improve. The reason we did this, and this is the shocker that I'm going to share with you, and I started with my own commitment to men's engagement, my own personal, because of this. Our RCT showed that outcomes for women were not better when men went through the program, despite how highly valued it is for women, and despite how much all of us are now seeking to do it. The outcomes were not actually better. Men's attitudes changed, and sometimes even their behaviors, but it didn't lead in a random controlled trial to changes. And so we have to do better, and we have to figure out. Now, I was asked when I was presenting these RCT results with my colleagues last week, well, why, if the results show that, why even bother? And I'm going to say, because I think it takes more than what most of us do with men's engagement. Most of us do like a 3-month training for the men, and that's not enough. I was married to a feminist man who grew up in a culture in which he was a patriarch from age 11 when his dad was incapacitated. When he wanted to stay at home and take care of the kids, which he did so that my career could go first. I mean, he was reading Andrew Dworkin when I met him. He was a serious pro-feminist man. He was called a cuckold by his own family. His own mother started to less respect him. And the men around him in the community said, oh, you got yourself a white woman, so now you don't need to work anymore. Now, how did that make him feel in a society in which he's supposed to be the provider? So that made it very difficult. And he actually ended up spiraling into abuse and, hit me with a chain in front of the kids. I mean, and that's not the man he was and not the man he could be, but the societal norms around what was expected of him. And so I believe deeply that we have to change patriarchy for men and for women, and that we need to design men's engagement programs. There are organizations who do great work with men and that's not ours. Women are still the ones excluded. We get 1% of the credit for our businesses, 5% of the credit. We get 1% of investment. Let's not forget that it is women who are most left out here. However, despite the fact that my organizations focus on the outcomes for women, and we do men's engagement to make sure that the women are, in Afghanistan, in 70 countries in the world, a woman can't even open a bank account on her own independently. We have to change the laws, but we also have to change the norms, because in Nigeria and DRC, women have the right to inherit, but it's traditional norms and customs that keep them from realizing that right. So you can't just have the paper right, you have to be able to claim that right. And that's why we need change on the ground. But what I always say is, it's not just a men's engagement, it's the mother-in-laws. My mother-in-law was the most sexist person I have ever met on this planet. Lovely woman, but she was taught and she believed that men were better and that her son was better than her daughters. And so we have to change norms for everybody.
That's a really interesting point that you've raised, and I will be coming back to Stephanie shortly. But, people are socially conditioned and people don't recognize this. We have seen young women who are 11 and 12 think that FGM is a rite to passage because they have been told and they don't know any different. A young girl that's living in a rural part of the world who knows that actually, as soon as I start my puberty, that I'm going to be a bride, because they don't know anything and they're not being educated. And we need to change that, because if we want a lasting change, then we really need to do that. And I think, thank you for sharing your story with us. So, it's really powerful, Larry, as well. And, one of the things that I'm going to come to you, Steph, is that a lot of people often will say, oh, we need data, we need this. And sometimes grassroots organizations and smaller organizations around the world are not very good at collecting data, or they don't actually know what to do with it if they do have the data. And, you know, and when if somebody like yourself or myself are looking at different ways, how do we engage and look at putting resources in? Because we want to know data. We would like to know what the impact is going to be. We want to know, well, this is the baseline, this is the issue today. And if we were to put £100,000 into this organization, what are we going to get back? And it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts about, like, you know, around data. How can we engage with NGOs to maybe become better skilled at, you know, promoting themselves, especially women, because sometimes women are doing the work and they're not measuring the impact of their work almost.
Absolutely. And Mandy, if it's okay with you, I'll just build off one point that Lori made, because I thought it was so powerful. And then I'll turn to the sort of the data side of things. But Lori, thank you so much for naming patriarchy. I think it is so important, because when we often talk about engaging men and boys, it feels a little apolitical. And it feels like what we should be talking about is actually a gender transformative approach, and to be really upfront with our ask, which is this redistribution of power and privilege, really, and sort of transforming masculinities. So I think that, you know, there's some, you know, fantastic partners that UNF is you know, aware of their work and supporting their work in some way in the field. But, you know, Men Engage and Men Care are two organizations who are working in concert with feminist and women's groups to essentially transform patriarchal masculinities. And there will be some very, very interesting work we're thinking that will come out of essentially a feminist agenda for masculinities at generation equality. So we're hoping to sort of help, you know, encourage and grow the field more, but recognizing obviously some of the tensions that you raised as well, in terms of not wanting to cede space or investments, and to be really thoughtful as we negotiate those tensions. But that was an aside. Back to your data question, Mandy. It's a really important one, because I think it also has implications for how donors, funders, you know, multilateral organizations think about what constitutes success for a lot of implementing partners. There's this obviously a broader move, especially recently, to decolonize international development. And part of that also means that we need to rethink our metrics for success, what we consider hard data versus qualitative or other sort of, you know, data or evidence methodologies. We know that, you know, there are data capacity issues on gender across the board. So both for the small grassroots women's organizations, as well as for a lot of national statistical offices in countries who, you know, are struggling to collect basically very, you know, basic admin data on the lives of women and girls. And so with all of that, I see it as really it's both a political problem and a technical problem, right? So the political problem is helping to convince people that gender data is important, that it can be used in these, you know, ways around policy, around, you know, program intervention, and that, you know, that it's worth investing kind of the resources and capacity. And then the other aspect is the technical element, where, you know, there is a need for data training, as well as, I think, an openness to sort of different types of data and evidence for different purposes, right? So if you are a central bank and you're trying to craft a national financial inclusion strategy, the data that you are going to need on women is going to be very different than a grassroots organization who is interested in participating in sort of, you know, local climate discussions and is trying to get the attention of an international funder to resource them in that way, right? So I think that there's what the beauty of it is, that there is like sort of a diversity of types of data that hopefully will be fit for purpose for different things. But overall, there still needs to be so much more capacity building, so much more investment in terms of gender data. That being said, I know that there's a lot of discussion about the gender data gaps, things that we don't know about girls and women, and we can't let that hold us back in terms of action either. So not having the data or the evidence, or not having recent data or evidence, or necessarily comparable data or evidence, doesn't mean that we can sort of still stay passive and on the sidelines, right? There's enough that we know from local partners, from women's activists, that we should really be privileging their experiences and their knowledge in this way, as in parallel, we build out more holistic data systems and capacity.
That's a really valid point, and I think it's really brilliant. And I'm going to be coming over to Kentron, who's doing a lot of great work on the ground, and it would be really good to see, you know, you mentioned about circular economies, and I'll come back to you on that. But I do think that the point that you've made is a really valid one there, Stephanie, around, you know what, listening to the people on the grassroots, the advocates, the champions, the charities, because actually they are the ones that will get the real data. They can tell us real things. And, you know, and I've seen big companies, and I do a lot with Silicon Valley myself. And sometimes what I'll say to them is, look, sometimes there's some really rich data. So in Bangladesh, in the Rohingya refugee camps, already we know that there's like over 1 million people that are claiming, you know, refugee status in that country right now. So you could work out how many women. So, you know, you don't always need to be so flashy. Sometimes, you know, that intelligence, that soft intelligence is just as good. And it's about changing the switch there as well, because actually it's really important that we do that. So that was a really good point there as well that you raised. So thank you for that. Katrin, I'm going to come back to you because you made a really interesting point about the circular economy as well, and about entrepreneur women. But actually, you know, as a young person yourself, we've seen the class of 2020 being affected like never before. We've seen young children not at school anymore, and girls are not able to go back to school. And even in the UK, they've only gone back to school for about a week or two. And we've seen that young people now are not off wanting to go to university, or they're struggling to get their first kind of real paid job. As a young person, it would be great to hear from you any tips and tools that you may have, and also a bit about the circular economy that you spoke about as well. So, you know, if somebody is listening in today who might want to hear something, what would your advice be to them?
Well, thank you for the question. And, you know, to address the first part of just young people being affected so much by this pandemic, we at Green Hope always say that, you know, you can be your own boss. And, you know, with the pandemic and this new normal that we're trying to create, there are a lot of traditional jobs that might not even be applicable in the future. So really becoming entrepreneurs yourself and taking that step out of our comfort zone is something that we try to advocate for. It's easier said than done. We know that, but yes, trying to be your own boss and having those who do have the resources that can help them to move forward in this scenario, it can work out very well. We've seen that with some of our members. But to address the other part of circular economy, anything that we do for a sustainable future, and with gender playing such a huge role in that, is a circular economy. So really moving away from the linear supply chains that are discriminatory, that do not take into account diverse voices, that do not take into account localization and the importance of traditional and indigenous knowledge. Anything that doesn't do that, that is a linear economy. But a circular economy does recognize the importance of a horizontal approach towards addressing our world's greatest challenges and really getting those who are usually left behind to the forefront, so that we're able to hear everyone's unique opinions and voices. So for me, that is what a circular economy is. And very often for young people, these terms kind of alienate them, because you seem like, okay, this is a really high level thing that that adults would talk about, but honestly, all the work that we do on the ground that contributes to the creation of this regenerative, circular, climate smart, women-led economy.
Brilliant, thank you so much for that. I really find that really interesting as well. I'm now going to just take a couple of audience questions, and then I will be coming back to all of you for a final thought and your sort of advice or pearls of wisdom for people. But I'm just going to take one of the questions. So it says, the one I wanted to ask you was, how do we hold educational and healthcare institutions responsible for the gender inequalities that have been normalized in their community, or in our community, sorry. So who would like to answer that one? How do we hold educational and healthcare institutions responsible?
I have one really brief one I think would be great to hear from all of us. One way, because there's multiple, you have to take a 360-degree approach, is to build up change agents from the ground. And that's what Women for Women concentrates on. So provide additional training and advocacy. So for example, we managed to get a meeting with the First Lady of Afghanistan for change agents, who was able to say, this is what it's like in remote rural areas. For example, for International Women's Day, because our Nigerian participants couldn't march en masse like they normally did, what they did instead is they spread out and they met with traditional leaders to say, we need access to healthcare, education, jobs. So educating and holding accountable from the local level up is one thing.
Yeah, That's a really good point. And yep, come to you, Kenji, go on.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just to cite Greenhope's example, we are actually partnered with education institutions around the world, from the Toronto District School Board, which is Canada's largest school board, to Dubai's Education Board, to the Youth Parliament of Suriname. And Suriname is a very special example because the president himself had invited Greenhope in 2018 to go to his country, work with the youth, through education for sustainable development, to preserve the 93% forest cover of Suriname. And it's actually the most forested country in the world. And we and our leaders, and especially the girls, it was extremely amazing to see that how we were able to do that through education for sustainable development. And even now, just with the Toronto District School Board, Greenhope Foundation provides that free education for sustainable development to the children, so that they're not missing out on all of the opportunities that they would have gotten. This is during the pandemic and even before the pandemic. So that's one way that we engage the education institutions around the world. Yes, holding them accountable, but also taking the responsibility onto ourselves as young people who know the importance of this ESD in the current times. And another thing that we strongly advocate for is changing the way clinical trials are done, because very often clinical trials are conducted keeping the white male in mind. And that bias carries on to so many vaccine trials. I'm sure even the COVID vaccine trials, some of them have maintained that. And the only way to address that is to first obtain the data that can shine a light on these malpractices. And without that data, it just degenerates into an argument of opinions. So even here, it's the absence of gender data that's the root of the problem. So we really strongly advocate for the data collection that my fellow panelists were talking about from the ground up, so that we're able to really reach out to everyone.
Really good point. Thank you. Stephanie, is there anything else you'd like to add? Or
just to add and underscore that I think we're all talking about kind of an expansion and a resourcing of civil society space in countries. I've been particularly inspired by just the accountability and activism that has emerged from Black Lives Matters and the anti-racism efforts in the past year, and recognizing that it was years and years of patient, often marginalized organizing and activism that engendered this broader and overdue racial justice reckoning, at least for us in the US. And so in that same way, the local feminist activists, local change makers that Lori's sort of talking about, have been seeding this accountability and, call in or call out, depends on the tactic, sort of culture within their own countries for many years. And so what we can do to just follow their lead and support them to do the work that they're already doing, I think is the way to go.
Brilliant. There's a really good question that's come in. It's about, we're asking about a localized approach, but actually, how do we change mindsets about getting women a seat at the table? How can we change that? Because actually, that is something that I've been really passionate about for the last 30 odd years, where I've seen the same people at the same table. And sadly, people are holding onto chairs. They never want to pull the chair out for the next generation. And for me, it's so important that we lift the next generation up and we empower other women. And I think that this is more important than ever before. And like I made the point earlier, one thing that Ketch is doing amazingly is that actually, she's made it to the top. She's now passing the elevator back down to collect other women, and she's making advocates in her own organization. And I think that making them ambassadors and really leading from the front, that is a really great way to be. One of the things that I would like to ask you then is, how can we, when we talk about women empowerment, we're talking about, their voice being heard in decision making. How can we actually include them? How can we make sure that their voice actually really matters? And it's not just lip service, and it's not just about, oh, well, great, I'm giving Larry a seat, so Larry should just be grateful she's been here today. How do we sort of change that?
Yeah, I can by just saying that, at Greenhope, again, we do that through skills-based education and really providing them with the tools to be economically independent. And when they have a seat at the table, it's meaningful engagement. And one thing that I've been fighting against my entire life as a young person and as a woman and a woman of color is tokenization. And, we've seen this so often in high-level processes where it's just okay to have one voice from a traditionally marginalized community. And, that's enough then. And it's really not enough, because there are so many different challenges and unique challenges that these vulnerable and traditionally marginalized communities face. So that's one thing that I've been fighting against, and when I started Green Hope, we've been fighting against. And again, through education, we try to boost the confidence of the women, and that actually does it itself. We don't have to do anything there, providing them with the impetus to speak up, to demand their rights, assert presence in decision making. And we've seen that the women who become economically independent are also able to get their girls to school, and their boys as well, in defiance of any resistance that the archaic social norms impose on them. And that economic security also gives them the power to square up against gender violence and then take up leadership roles even outside their household.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I don't, Larry and Stephanie, have you got any points that you would like to add to that question?
Mandy, I would like to come in on something, and that is with respect to just come in on this notion of localization, which I have a real bugbear about. The notion that we're going to localize development and change processes really, it gets me actually angry. There have been change processes happening since the dawn of time. The reason Congo is in the situation it's in has a lot to do with outside intervention. The first democratically elected leader, Patrice Lumumba, was killed with the intervention of Western intelligence services. So there have been women and movements, building development and change. So there's no that we're going to localize. No. We are going to lift off the constraints and shift power and resources to the movements that have always been there. And while my organization is also part of capacity building, and for the 61% of the women we serve are non-literate, the vast majority haven't been to school. So yes, we have to provide education and training. But I get also angry about this notion that it's capacity building we need to do. I have learned more from African feminists and Indian feminists than I have from anyone else. If you think about the movements for change that have happened in India at this scale, I wish that the US could learn from some of these movements in order to do our COVID response, et cetera. And so, so the capacity needs to be built to change the way we understand how development processes happen, and we understand the structures of power. And that capacity building isn't from the North, from the West. Both of these are problematic concepts, to Congo, et cetera. So to problematize it a little bit more, it's about seeing where the power is held and shifting it. We've gotten more and more and more unequal in the last decades, and that has to change. And so we also have a job to play in, me as a US citizen in the United States, of addressing that, to let people have the space that's been taken away from them.
You've made your real final point. And I was just going to say, before we go, because we're down to the wire now, your final thought for us, Lowry, before I come over to Stephanie.
Well, I think I've taken time, and I just am so inspired by Stephanie, by Kekeshan, by yourself, Mandy. So I think we can see the power of women with women, and the power of grassroots activists for change. So let's let.
No, thank you. No, thank you for that. Thank you again. I really appreciate all your valid points. Stephanie, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add, but we would love to hear your final thoughts.
Absolutely. And just to build off what Lori said, I think we need a power and privilege audit encompassing every single aspect of the gender and international development field. I've been really heartened to see that we're starting to apply our own sort of intersectional analyses of power, not to just the issues we work on, but to our own organizations, to the structure of the field itself. And I do hope that we can center and follow the leadership of these feminist organizations and grassroots groups who've been doing this work for decades, and if not longer at this point. I would say my last point is just that we have a great opportunity with Generation Equality. Please join us in Mexico City at our virtual convening on March 29th to 31st. And this is the moment. This is the moment to revitalize global feminist solidarity. This is the moment to come into the journey with us, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you so much, and it really is important that people do that. It's free to register, and we really would love people to get behind that and to join it, because I know Christine and a few other people that are leading on it, and it'll be great. So thank you so much for the shout out on that. Kekeshan, for your final thoughts, and you got a last minute to any final words or any last comments.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, to create an equal world, we need to address gender equality as a humanitarian issue. And that requires a transformative change in our mindsets. And that change must begin in every home within the four walls first, and then evolve to society at large. And I strongly believe that young people need and can lead the way in bringing about this metamorphosis and catalyzing our inherent passion for the mobilization of this transformation. And my last point would be, I think, women standing together and with each other and being fearless and raising our voices. I think that's so crucial that we provide that support system for each other so that we are able to bring about that gender equal world that we all want.
No, brilliant. I just think that, this could go on for another hour or so, this conversation. I think we've only scratched the surface, and I would just like to thank every single one of you, because we've brought so much to the table. We were looking at the inequalities. They've come to the surface like never before. There's been so many other questions that we want to address, and they've all come in, and I just feel like, it's been a really, really interesting debate. And it's really important that this is, like what you said, Stephanie, this is the time. If you want to get involved in a movement, this is the world's biggest movement, and you really want to be a part of it. Even if you don't think that you're a feminist, you think that actually, oh, maybe, I'm too old to join, or I'm too young. No, generation is for everyone. And we really want everyone to get involved in this movement, to join in and make sure that no one's left behind, that we address the inequalities, we address the the social conditioning and the out-of-date cultural norms of early child forced marriage and FGM and all these practices that have no place in the West or anywhere in the world, that we educate people. And when we talk about building back, that we build back better, but actually we build back by including women at the table, that they are a part of the conversation. The next generation have a say. They are a part of all of these conversations that are happening, and that we're not picking the same people every time to be a part of the conversation, that we bring everyone to the table and make sure that whether somebody might have a disability and think, oh, well, actually they can't come here, they can. We need to be inclusive. We've got to make sure that everyone is a part of the conversation. I just want to say thank you. We've now finished dead on time. It's now 3:00 UK, and thank you for all the amazing work that you all do. It is just phenomenal. Just want to say thank you again, and keep up the amazing work, everybody. And please join us for the World Humanitarian Forum in May. And please, the registration is out there. We're going to have an amazing lineup. We're going to have fireside chats. We're going to have panels. We're going to have keynotes. And, it's something that we really want people to join. And please get behind us and attend our events. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, Mandy, for moderating.
Bless you. I know it's hard because you've got so many questions, and I want to ask a lot of questions. Yeah.
Master to get all through that in 1 hour. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It is. I don't think we have, but thank you so much, ladies. It was really great to have you all on. So